working man, dang near all my life, and I'll keep on working.
Hi guys, welcome to Truth Talkin Thursday. This is Jim. I'm Jane, and Jim brought up a really cool topic, and we just had about a half an hour rant session on it, or rather I did. My bad. But at least I got it all out now, so there'll be no yelling or screaming. No, there wasn't any yelling or screaming. Anyway, Jim was talking about drug testing in the workplace. Yes or no? And it brought up just a huge gamut of, I guess I'd have to say, frustration for me. And for me, I feel like it all stems from, I read a quote recently, and I think it's really fitting. Society has adopted the idea that everyone has a right, but forgotten that we also have a responsibility. And for me, that's what this topic of drug testing in the workplace comes down to. Jim, what made you want to discuss this topic?
It was the gleam in your eye when I mentioned it, and then you just went off. and I love it when that happens.
Okie dokie.
Well, we have a sort of a monumental stop in time coming up in history coming up at the end of June. I mean, where cannabis will be legal to be able to use it for personal use and all this kind of stuff. I mean, personal use, you might as well be kind of peeing in the wind. You know, that's about how much sense that makes. I mean, what's personal use? Is it, you know, do you have to be falling down hammered before that's personal use meant? Anyway, I could go into that, have my own little rant around that one. But the fact is at the end of June, employers are going to be faced with this whole idea of what am I going to do when my employees come in high? Or can they? Or are they going to be allowed to? Or how do you stop that? Or what happens with? And for me, they haven't thought this through. All they've done is count the dollars at the end of the month or the end of the year and grin because the federal coffers are going to be much bigger. So, and to me, it's just a cash grab. That's all I'll say about that part. But the idea is how are employers going to handle this? How are employees going to handle this? How are other employees in a workplace? How are they going to handle it? Are they going to be okay with working next to a guy that everybody knows has got a buzz going? So it's and how is that going to be in terms of people working in a steel company, for instance, who are responsible for moving 25 tons of molten steel from one end of the place to the next? The idea of drug testing in the workplace, to me, makes perfect sense. I'm 100% for it. Employers need to be protected to some degree here in terms of their liability and who's going to do what, and do we wait until somebody gets hurt on the job before we do something about it, or do we do something proactively so that it happens less often?
I think this opens up a door, or several doors,
Yeah.
to just a whole lot of, as Jim stated earlier, what ifs and what then. And I think it can very quickly go from bad to worse. And again, I think it all comes down to the arguments and the excuses and justifications that can be made up and stuck to by the idea that we have a right and not so much the responsibility. I feel that what Jim said about the employer needing to have support and needing to be able to judge for themselves. Jim just mentioned about the possibility of maybe somebody having an allergic reaction to something and, it being mistaken for some sort of inebriation or altered state of some kind. And my first reaction in my mind was, yes, well, once you're tested, that will be determined. So it won't be an issue. Nobody is going to be fired on the spot for appearing to be a certain way, because that's the way we've backed up our society. So stop worrying about those things and behave yourself and take responsibility for your actions, and everything will be well. That's the way I look at it. I think that, you know, things happen, mistakes happen, and in all honesty, it all comes down to who we are, who we want to be, and what's going on in our lives. And if each of us would take that responsibility on ourselves, everything else would fall into place. And there wouldn't be this idea of whose right is whose. Because once you start having that attitude, as soon as you establish your right, you remove somebody else's. That's my attitude.
Usually. That's usually the way it goes down. How do we protect the employer here? He needs to be protected as well as the employee.
The Health and Safety Act and all of its rules and regulations that has been implemented is a very huge deal. Drug testing in the workplace is all part of that, and yet legalizing it is going to open up a whole new can of worms for the Health and Safety Act. And I mean, obviously that's the way it has to be if it's being implemented and legalized. But when I think about that, like, these are all issues that are meant to be put in place for both the employer and the employee. But it appears to me that with this legalization, it's going to favor the employee as opposed to the employer. And yet it's the employer that is taking all of the risk. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what's frustrating to me, because the employer is the one who has to take all of the responsibility. And the employee should feel blessed to have a job.
Yes.
That's putting
absolutely.
it simply.
Absolutely.
Like, there's way more to it than that.
Yeah. And what, I mean, there's the discussion to be had around how do you test somebody? Mm-hmm. How do you drug test them? I think more the question is what do we do with employees who test positive? I don't advocate that they should get fired on the spot.
Legalizing cannabis opens up a whole new door of, you can't ignore it anymore for the employer. You can't, we all know things happen. You know, somebody goes out and has a liquid lunch. You know, these things happen. But when you legalize something like that, it now becomes an issue that can no longer be ignored, because there's ramifications to the responsibility of those things. Mm-hmm. That's how I see it. And I think that's going to cause a bigger effective ripple than has been anticipated.
And this isn't just about cannabis either. I mean, cannabis is the obvious one that comes to mind because it's probably the one that would be most abused on a job site, but it's not the only one. Better the question, what do we do about it when we determine that one of the employees is actually impaired to the point where mm-hmm. it can't function? Mm-hmm. So we've got an awful lot of thinking and work to do, and we have very, very precious little time to do it. And this is happening far too fast with very minimal discussions around what ifs and all that kind of stuff. And my concern is that somebody's going to have to die before something happens of any substance around conversations.
I agree. I think
it's nobody I know and love and care for.
As well do I. I think that's so true. I think it's a lot of food for thought. So all of you employers out there who have thoughts, we'd love to hear them. Mm-hmm. Employees too, we welcome your thoughts, and let's think about how to handle what is coming.
But be fair to the employee at the same time.
And I think
we have
that's
to
possible.
Make sure that goes all the way around to everybody.
Mm-hmm. So have a great week, everybody.
Thanks for stopping by.